Ladies and gentlemen, we're back with Season 2, Episode 22, Hurricane Fluttershy. This is the episode in which the Pegasi of Ponyville have to get together in order to form a tornado, a waterspout to be more accurate, which funnels all the water from a specific reservoir up to Cloudsdale so they can produce rain for the season. And, as a side consequence of this, Fluttershy has to deal with some extremely relatable issues, and I'm just gushing at this point because I actually really like this episode. This might actually be my favorite episode to date, and that's impressive considering that we've already had an episode with Discord in it. Now, real quick, just for fun, I just linked something in chat. It was an image of Flim and Flam selling toilet paper. It's relevant, I swear. But the reason I noticed that it was a side thing, because I was looking up what the relative calculation was for wing power. And apparently... hang on, where's the results? Because he gives all the math here. Yeah, and respirators, of course. There it is. So apparently, the rough equivalent of one wing power is flying at 19.5 miles per hour. Roughly. Oh, there it is. It's right there. Duh. So if anybody wondering at the relative, the measuring thing, I'll get back to the measuring thing in a minute. Because first I want to talk about how this episode was written by Cindy Morrow, someone who I have been kind of curious about their particular approach to styling, because they did Family Appreciation Day, which is good. That's the one that effectively pushed Granny Smith into actually being a character. Read and Weep, which was a good episode. And Sisterhood Social, which was most of a good episode as well. So pretty good track record overall, I'd say. Yeah, no kidding. We odds, but I'll get to that time. Yeah, she kind of does Rascor. I would agree. So hang on, let's rewind a second. So we start the episode, and we have Derpy, of course, because why not? And what I initially in my notes wrote down as Spike Pony. Apparently, oh, excuse me. So, okay, this episode actually names a lot of Pegasi, mostly in standard callouts. I have a feeling this was just labeling them for toys. Hasbro got a Hasbro. We were talking about the Transformers My Little Pony thing earlier, which is a real thing, by the way. It's actually a real comic that's coming out later this year. Transformers and... Anyways. But what I found amusing is... the one I called Spike Pony, whose name is Flitter. I call her that because she's voiced by the same actress who voices Spike, and it's really obvious, like it sounds like Spike. Then there's Cloud Chaser. Now, what's really funny about this is there's a scene later in this episode where Flitter, Cloud Chaser, and Spike all talk within seconds of each other. That kind of thing is exactly what I've been trying to avoid with the theater, trying to avoid actors talking to each other. Because it's a little bit every time you see it, unless you have some extremely talented actors, like, say, Tabitha St. Germain, for example. But anywho, hello again, SJ. So, naturally, we have the old... rewind. So, I find it interesting. So, Rainbow Dash runs around and gathers all of the ponies. Yes, we actually are Imperial Stars for... Gathers all the ponies from Ponyville. I have a weird feeling that... there is a literal census of how many Pegasi, unicorns, and earth ponies there are in Ponyville. We've already talked about how Ponyville is kind of unique for being the melting pot of actually having all three living regularly and in large numbers with each other. And you notice we do have quite a few Pegasi here, so just interesting to think about. But Rainbow Dash naturally takes the leadership role, which doesn't surprise me too much given what she's already accomplished. And the fact that she's kind of a joint representative, technically being from Cloudsdale, but actually being a member of Ponyville. Kind of goes back to that whole identity thing from last episode, now that I think on it. I'm sorry, one moment. I just want to check something really quick here. This won't take me long. Interesting. I'll have to look into that later. Okay. So, moving on. And yeah, she also happens to be their best flyer. I'll get to that in a second, too. So naturally, they have the old-timey informative video to do exposition. I have to admit, that made me smile. You know, the old information videos. So this kind of got us talking about Fallout Equestria in chat, but I actually find myself wondering if this really was the impetus for Fallout Equestria. Because it was done straight out. The same style. I mean, obviously it's not aping Fallout, it's aping the thing Fallout was aping. Because both were aping that old-timey informative video thing, which was a real thing in real life. But, okay, apparently it was written Season 1, so never mind. I am incorrect on that. It's just funny, though. And yeah, they all get upset because the film breaks. Anyways. So, you know, old-timey video, which gets some more world building in. I always love some good world building. This is yet another example of how they have to artificially do a natural process. Water evaporates. I forget the actual term for this whole cycle, but, you know, water evaporates, goes into the atmosphere, forms clouds, rains down, repeat, right? It's a normal cycle. Here we see that they have to artificially get involved in that, and of course in a particularly fantastical way. They need all the Pegasi to circle enough to get the water up from the reservoir, which probably gathers over the course of the year up into the factories where they can use it to push out, you know, push out clouds for the rest of the year. It's just fascinating to think about because I know this sounds so stupid. One of the things I always liked about this setting is how artificially maintained the environment is. Not because I like the artificial thing itself, although I do, but it's because I love the fact that it means that the ponies in general are literally mandatory for the environmental cycle to exist. You know, for things that we would consider normal to happen, they need them to function, so it kind of directly ties them into the environment. It's just a cool idea. Anyways, forgive me for gushing for just a second there. Yeah, that's a good question, Weouds. I mean, considering just last episode we saw the Dragonlands are not exactly a pleasant-looking area, you know, with very few clouds and barren rock and lava. And we also find out later on that several other surrounding lands are not exactly doing great either. We've got the Frozen North, which is where the Yaks are. And then we've got where Griffin's Stone, I think? Griffin's Stone, which is also not exactly a paradise, although that's mostly because of the Griffins. What I'm trying to say is I feel it's a deliberate recurring element that the place where the people are literally in harmony with their environment is the place where things are idyllic, whereas everywhere else is not. But we'll see more about that in the future. Anywho. Now, of course, we could try to infer some, you know, corollary parallels from that, and we could, but I think it's more likely, I mean, yeah, okay, analogy, take care of your environment, duh, but I like to think of it more in the fantastical element. This is going to sound really stupid, but one of the things I always like the idea of is that ponies will settle an area, and then over time that area literally becomes more prosperous because of the fact that they are regulating the environment in that area now. To wit, and Dream Whisperer just mentioned that, the bisons back in, I think that was Season 1, who lived out in the desert area. I like to think that over time, those apple orchards and, you know, the work they do to maintain that area would develop that from desert into something more agrarian. Just, that's pure headcanon. But yeah, exactly, Rasco. It's basically the greenhouse, not the greenhouse effect. That's a different thing. It's like having a greenhouse, a controlled environment, which is also an idea I've always been fascinated by in fiction, because there's a level in a lot of fictions, usually science fiction, in which a specific society becomes so advanced that they have total control over their environment. Ergo, they can do things with it that aren't really normally possible because they have that mastery of the environment. It's always been a cool idea to me, you know, true levels, not just of terraforming, but of forcing things that otherwise shouldn't be able to function, like making trees work indoors, or having a massive cityscape which itself is covered entirely in, you know, green agrarian stuff, blah, 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 blah. Anyways, point being, well, we have a natural biosphere in Imperial Star Destroyer. It might not be necessary for theirs. Post-crisis Krypton. Yeah, that's another good one, Baronessa. Admittedly, for some strange reason, the one I always think of is actually Kingdom Hearts. If you look into the backstory of Kingdom Hearts, I can't think of it. Radiant Garden, which is the name of one of the worlds, had this level of environmental control and mastery to the point where they could, you know, have... Basically, I'm trying to think how to explain this a little bit. Because there's when you have the ability to affect your environment, and then there's when you have the ability to control your environment to an extreme degree, a mastery of it, like I said. So there's actually like 3 separate tiers there. You know, industrial wasteland would be tier 1. Being able to, you know, try and maintain some semblance of balance would be tier 2. Having no environmental problems whatsoever would be tier 3. Like in a tier 3 situation where you have actual mastery of the environment, there wouldn't be hurricanes, there wouldn't be unknown earthquakes, because you would actually have, you know, that level of control. Just food for thought. I'm getting way off topic though. Let's move on. Let's move on. I love the world building of this series. It's one of the things I love most about it. So Spike screws up, gets the breaks the projector. Rainbow Dash pretends she's Patton for a moment, and then Thunderlane coughs. I love how early on that is. It's right at the beginning, basically, just right up there. Because, yeah, it's excellent foreshadowing, but what's really appropriate is we're discussing this episode now, while Flu 19 is running through the world, and it's a respiratory disease. It's spread through. Anyways, so Bulk Biceps is there, of course. Again, naturally. Bunch of names dropped, already mentioned that. I mentioned animation. I decided to write this down for anybody who's actually curious. At 4 minutes and 32 seconds, there's a moment in which Fluttershy leans up against the wall and then slumps down it. I don't even know what that's called, but it's basically a morph of her model live so that it looks like she's actually slumping rather than doing this. I hate to nitpick back act, but I thought the flu was also COVID-4 or something like that. Granted, there's a ridiculous amount of misinformation about COVID-19, so what the hell do I know? Moving on. So I just wanted to mention a specific example of good animation there. So Rainbow Dash, this is a good episode. Rainbow Dash reaches out to Fluttershy. Now, first of all, Fluttershy tries to fake it. Duh, right? Rainbow Dash calls her on both of them. But then, this is actually really cool. When Fluttershy says she can't fly, Rainbow Dash immediately points out that she's actually a good flyer, which I'm going to go ahead and call a continuity counter because that's already been established. That didn't come from nowhere. Like, there is actually several previous episodes that we've been pointing out where Fluttershy's flying capacity has actually been called into attention. So that's cool. Yeah, exactly, Raskor. This has already happened. And Rainbow Dash even points out a specific example. And she's like, oh, but that was necessary. This is more like performance, which I'm not all that good at. Which is another continuity counter moment. So we're up to 8 now. Yes, I'm counting it. Shut up. Now, there's one other thing that happens in this episode which is really awesome. And it develops over the course of the episode. It's one of the things I really like about this. It's that Rainbow starts off and then immediately pulls herself back. Did you catch that? Like, she's, yeah, no, but I need... Stops herself, pulls back, hang on. And then... I don't understand that question, Imperial Stormtrooper. And then approaches Fluttershy like Fluttershy needs to be approached too, which is good. And again, showcases how she's getting better about that and learning more about how to be a friend for Fluttershy. Because you can't be the same kind of friend to every person. Yeah, as Shikor points out, last season she would have just kept bugging out. That looks... I'm pretty sure I see a 2 there. Yeah, no, there's 2. There's 2. We're cool. We're cool. Anyways. So... the teasing. Why does teasing hurt us so much? I found myself just thinking about that while watching this episode. Because it shouldn't. I mean, it shouldn't. There's no logical reason why teasing should affect us the way it does. I am saying us, by the way, because I'm including myself in that. Admittedly, over the last 7 to 8 years at this point, I have developed thicker skin as a result of being an online persona. But it's ridiculous because I still get comments on YouTube comments mostly that hurt. That are painful, that are just ugh, and I have to kind of deal with that, right? So yeah, I'm including myself in this as well. And yeah, I'm seeing some good answers here. You know, it's a reflection of self-doubt because we are social creatures and we need peer approval. Yeah, especially if it's coming out of nowhere, you know, blah blah blah. It's interesting, and yeah, obviously we as a species are very afraid of, ironically, of not abandonment, banishment. There we go. Because historically, for a huge portion of human history, banishment meant death or worse. So, you know, that's a very long-standing cultural thing for us that is probably still very well ingrained into our people. But anyways, it's just interesting to think about. Because again, I am in no way mocking Fluttershy. In fact, what Fluttershy goes through is frankly PTSD. In fact, it's so accurate, it makes me wonder if the writer has gone through PTSD. Speaking as someone who still suffers from that, that was a fairly accurate portrayal. Now, what I suffered from in real life is so much worse than what Fluttershy went through, but that doesn't matter, because MLP is better than real life. But the symptom, the reaction to it was almost identical. Remember the scene where all the eyeballs pop up and she starts hyperventilating and just like she starts doing this thing where she's just reining back a little bit as she's losing the ability to control herself, and she's sobbing so hard her face is covered, and they show the grass sticking to her face. Very minor touch, very minor animation touch, but it's accurate because it shows us how wet her face has become from tears. That stuff is sticking to her. Wonderful little details like that. Amazing attention to detail and showcasing. It's one of the better showcasings I've seen in a long time of PTSD. And yeah, you notice that it was just such an innocent laughter, not directed at her. Two friends just chatting with each other that completely started this whole cycle. Interesting to think about. Yeah, if I don't know which those are off the top of my head, but it makes me wonder if, you know, again, one of the writers literally does experience that and understands that. It's just, ooh. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. It's just very, very well, excellent job here. Let's rewind a second. So, teasing. I would like to think that the memory sequence they showed was exaggerated. That she didn't literally get shoved off a cloud by an uncaring PE teacher, and she didn't fall into a cloud and everyone gathered around her, pointed at her, and laughed. But I've had that happen to me. I can even name the grade, I'm not going to. I can even name the teacher, I'm not going to. How many of you have ever encountered that? The uncaring PE teacher. What was a damn shame for me personally is after I got past that particular teacher and I ended up working under another teacher who was actually a woman, and she actually gave a damn about physical education, like actually educating people on the nature of how your body works and why it works the way, and breathing and muscle usage and that. She is the reason that I learned that I have blood sugar and asthmatic issues. They're pretty minor. You know, I don't need an inhaler, but I didn't even know those were a thing because nobody gave enough of a damn to bother to pay attention to the symptoms I had up until her. And my God, that was a night and day scenario. Yeah, that's I mentioned the uncaring PE teacher. One step above the uncaring PE teacher is the doesn't actually teach you anything PE teacher, which, near as I can tell, appears to be very much the norm. Because, you know, I could go off on a rant on that for years at this point. No, seriously, I could go off for a long time about teachers. Let's move on. Let's move on. Well, yeah, so they all mock her and tease her. That I believe. Kids are kids. That I hate to say that, but kids are kids, even in My Little Pony. As I already mentioned, Rainbow starts strong and pulls back, which is really good. And Fluttershy says, I'll do this. I'll do it. And that's uplifting in its own right. It's so easy to underestimate how hard it is to overcome yourself. I'm sure several of you in chat know exactly what I mean by that. So, she goes, we get to the tryout area. We see Thunderlane, getting more names out there. Thunderlane coughs. No, actually he doesn't. Blossomforth coughs. Love her hair, by the way. Yeah. Love that foreshadowing. And again, coughing in a public environment. With a lot of people cloistered together who are all pushing themselves pretty hard. Huh. Anyways. But yeah, no, to return really quick, Rasker is absolutely correct. Getting started is the hard part. I actually took lessons on that, no joke, with regards to acting specifically, but I apply them elsewhere. Because getting on that stage and starting to say your lines, that's the hard part. Once you're in character, once you start talking, yeah, no, you just kind of fall into the flow of it, and the momentum carries you. But getting up on that stage is, oh, I still have issues with that from time to time. Not public speaking, but you get the idea. Anyways, because I public speak every day of my life. So, what they do next, so I've talked a lot about the real-life parallels and correlations, and the world building, and the magic, and the wind. Next thing I want to talk about is that this episode does something that I actually like, but is very difficult to do properly, and is always something you have to be very careful with your fiction. It's adding a measurable scale to things. You don't want it to go, say, Dragon Ball Z. See, I don't agree with that, Lord Harriman, but that's just from my own personal experience, which I just related. I'm curious why the second step would be harder, though. I mean, it is my experience that most aspects of life, both physically and metaphorically speaking, tend to follow the momentum rule. It's harder to start than to continue. See an airplane for my favorite metaphor for that. It is so much harder for an airplane to take off than it is for it to keep flying. It's so much harder to start exercising than to keep exercising. It's so much harder to start cleaning than to keep cleaning. It's so much harder to start making a YouTube channel because you're not able to get a job and have no other prospects for being able to pay the bills than keeping doing it, and so forth and so on. So I'm curious why the second step would be harder. That's true, Ruth. I actually want to touch back on that point, although since you brought it up, I'll mention that one of the things I like is that Fluttershy pushes herself not for the record, but just for getting it done, and for herself. But, you know, the record was off the table by the time that came up, which was a good move, I think, on behalf of the author. So... Really, She-Girl? Yeah, okay. I can only shrug at that one. You know? I can only shrug at that. I don't feel that way. I don't experience that. Momentum. Measurable power scales. God, I started on that and I got a little distracted. So actually introducing a scale. So what they do is they actually have this measuring scale which measures the amount of wing power that they can push out. And they actually give us specific numbers, too. So again, this is tricky when you add this to your fiction, because it has many obvious benefits. What it does is it gives the audience an immediate measurable way of determining variance. You know, we see in this very episode the difference between a good flyer, which was 9.3, and Rainbow Dash, which was 16.5. So now we have not only a measure of variance, but also of general scale. That 16.5 is huge. And thus, getting up to 10 is the goal, which also is very good. And naturally, this then gives a context for 0.5 later with Fluttershy. Now, the catch, though, is if you ever introduce this kind of measuring scale to your fiction, you need to maintain and keep it up. It is entirely too easy to accidentally, or thanks to simple negligence, use your scale improperly. I'm looking at you, Star Trek. Some of you have actually probably watched my Star Trek videos, and you may have noticed that every now and again, I will bring up warp speed. It happens periodically because warp speed is whatever the hell you want it to be for the specific episode. There are literal demonstrable instances where the math doesn't line up, and I've pointed out several of these. And that's an issue. When warp 9 literally means something different from one episode to the next, you got a problem. Oh, gotcha, Lord Harriman. Still don't agree, but I get you at least. I understand. I mean, I shouldn't say I don't agree. I don't understand. Well, I guess I do understand. I don't Janosko, but I do understand. There we go. Moving on. So we have the wing power established. It's a shame that actually doesn't come up again, apparently. I was actually kind of hoping. I don't recall it coming up again, but it's still an interesting thing in fiction. So, then Fluttershy is actually doing quite well. Probably was going to be in the 9-ish range. Then the laughing happens. We actually already mentioned that. Unrelated laughter sets her off. And God, do I know that one. Again, the PTSD comparisons are real here. Because the things that set off, that trigger PTSD, are not always linear and not always logical. And sometimes it's like a live electrical wire running down your spine that you can't deal with. And it makes everything burn. And you just kind of see that as she just completely loses everything. And the entire rest of the run there, she's looking back with the look as she's finishing it. Just, very, very well presented stuff. Again, huge, huge props to both the animation and the voice acting and the writing. So this then leads to that exact... I've already actually talked about this. The heavy breathing, the visual panic attack, running off in tears. You'll notice Rainbow Dash is very upset about that, too. Keep that in mind. I want to come back to that later. And the grass on the face, I already talked about that. So then we have a training montage. I have to admit the training montage was good fun. Because this, once again, and I swear I'm just going to keep bringing this up every time it does, this showcases how you can still have a joke and have it make sense in character. Yeah, total Rocky montage. You gotta have a montage. Every time show a little improvement. To show it all would take too long. You're gonna need a montage. Anyways. Oh, I liked that too, We're not quite there yet, though. They do the montage, and she's... Yeah, Angel is back to being a good pet. She's failing at pulling against a butterfly. Now, that's a joke, but it's a joke that fits in character, because of course Fluttershy can outpull a butterfly. But the problem is that she is so affected by this that she can't. That actually lines up, makes sense, and is in character while still being a joke. And I'm going to keep pointing these out as the episodes do them both correctly and incorrectly to really emphasize why the, as I call them, Looney Tunes moments don't really fit within the confines of the show. So, she pulls against the butterfly and she barely affects the... I can't think of what it's called all of a sudden. Shaft, white seeds. Help me out. What's that freaking thing called? She barely affects that, Gets pulled into the mud. I love how they pull up the little masks of the little punk. Dandelion, thank you. God. They pull up little masks. Oh, here, I have a prop here. It's like, hey, no. Every time, just to trigger her, to deliberately try to trigger her PTSD in order to help her get through it, which is interesting. Because, again, that's actually a real-life method that some people have used to some effect in order to get over it. Doesn't always work. It varies from person to person. But one of the methods that was actually advised to me by a counselor was exactly that. Try to deliberately provoke in a controlled environment in order to try and learn mental and emotional reactions in order to deal with it. You know, building up the automatic instinct to not be triggered effectively. Now, you remember how I mentioned it doesn't always work? Once again, My Little Pony impresses me by actually being intelligent rather than being stupid. See, one of the things that I dislike about fiction in general is when things happen and then the obvious expected thing happens. I'm saying that wrong. Let me rewind that a second. In another show, she would have gone off and done the montage, and then she would have pulled like 17 flight power or something ludicrous, right? Like, tell me you couldn't see that in another show. Live action or animated, kids or otherwise. Because that's how that usually goes. That's the typical path for fiction. And again, I'm trying really hard not to emphasize the typical part, because it's not like I want to hit on the, subverting expectations thing. But what My Little Pony usually does, rather than the expected, is the intelligent. Instead, what happens is she comes back after this training montage, and it turns out that it's only kind of helped. And that's right. That is exactly how that works. You don't just suddenly... You get a little bit better. She is on the road to improvement. But instead of actually just suddenly being cured, she's better. Think about that. Yeah, exactly, Ek. That gets massive thumbs up for me. And yeah, it's like a massive improvement. 0.5 to 2.3. I wrote it down right there. That is a huge improvement. And it deserves praise. And it is very believable. I dare say realistic, even. Again, intelligent storytelling. It's what really did sell me on this show originally, and stuff like that. What's best, though, to continue with the intelligent thing, how many times in fiction, especially cartoons, have you seen someone who says, it's okay, every little bit helps, it's all right, there's no reason to be ashamed, and they're like, you're right, there's no reason to be ashamed, right? But Fluttershy's reaction is heart-fallen, because of course it is. Because she did try, and she didn't succeed, which is what normally happens. And so then Rainbow Dash tries to give her the typical line. She does straight up do the typical line, every little bit helps. And Fluttershy is the one who points out how humiliating that is. Because it is. I mean, it's not like Rainbow Dash is wrong. But Fluttershy is also very correct. What people do not want to hear after they've tried and failed is, well, it's okay. Right? Yeah, how would you feel? Rainbow Dash can't even answer. Did you notice that? She literally couldn't respond verbally. She just stuttered for a bit before Fluttershy was like, exactly. This then leads to what Echt pointed out earlier, and I agreed with. Fluttershy runs off and is just, and Rainbow Dash kicks. She does this frustrated kick at the ground because of how much it's bothering her. And she has a line, which I wrote down, if only there was a way to lift Fluttershy out of the dumps. It's a good bit because it shows very clearly that Rainbow Dash cares more about Fluttershy than she does about the record. It's been a recurring motif the whole episode, and I've been pointing out little bits as they've been showing it, but that bit makes it very clear where her focus is. So then we get to the finale, the climax, and hey, the flu spread in a tight environment with people coughing when people were being pushed. I already pointed that one out. So they lose 8 people. I'm surprised it's only 8, if I'm being completely honest. So then they start and then they fail, which is, again, which is admittedly the typical thing to do. Fluttershy shows up to cheer them on. Yeah, no kidding, Chikor. Fluttershy shows up to cheer them on. That was a nice little touch, that she wanted to be there, even if she couldn't actually contribute. And then, actually they called it Feather Flu, because It only hit the Pegasi. I do actually, so Weoud's already got there before me. I do wonder if this is the kind of thing that only affects Pegasi. So, hello, Seraphim. Hope you're doing well. So, then the episode just starts smashing the feels button as hard as it can, if I'm just going to be completely blunt. Because what it does is several really excellent things in short succession. First, they fail, and Rainbow Dash is, no, I've got to try. I need to know, at least we need to try. Gives up on the record. It's not even on the thing. We just need to get it up there at all. We need to do our best. Okay. So then they try again. And then Twilight tries to convince Fluttershy that she can contribute. This is another value of adding scale to fiction. Because they mention that they are at, 795, I think? And Fluttershy only managed 2.3. Math, right? It's not enough. But what really... So, obviously, that helps. But what really sells that is because Fluttershy says it won't make a difference. And man, do I know that feeling. Even if you do man up and contribute, man up, you knowing that your little bit will not actually make a significant difference is an interesting and horrifying feeling, isn't it? Of course, it's also not true. I mean, it can be true. I shouldn't be so generic, but to use an example, I talk constantly about the 80-20 rule. The 20 wouldn't be without the 80, nor the 80 without the 20. Or, to put this another way, let's use Games Done Quick, the GDQ marathons that happen twice a year as an example of this. Usually you hear about the big donations, the $10,000 donations, the $500 donations, etc., etc. There's also literally hundreds and hundreds of donations for $2 and $5 and $10. That's the 80. It does actually add up. It does actually matter, demonstrably and provably. Now, again, this varies from situation to situation, but it's interesting to think about because it's hard to perceive that you matter when you are one grain in an avalanche. So Fluttershy is like, all right. But what I love then is not Rainbow, Twilight. Do it for Equestria, Do it for Rainbow Dash. Do it for yourself. Yeah, A Bug's Life actually hits that exact same point. You're right. It's the main theme of A Bug's Life. It's a good theme, too. I like that theme. It's very applicable in real life. Hello, Omni. You're catching me basically on the tail end here, so forgive me. But yeah, tail end, haha. So she decides to contribute, and what I really love is not only that they do it, which is a great emotional moment, but that as she's doing it, she basically psychs herself out and then right back into it. Which again is kind of how that works, isn't it? You notice nothing triggered her that time. Her thoughts started going in that direction. That happens. Speaking from personal experience, every now and again you just start thinking and your thought train goes away that it shouldn't, or that you don't want it to, and you start thinking about it and it starts getting to you. Right? I tend to think of it mentally, this is just me. I tend to think of it as letting myself freak out. Because then the thoughts keep, like, it starts self-replicating, right? It starts oscillating around the thoughts that you don't want to be thinking, the anxiety or the fear or the pain or the torment or whatever it actually is, and it gets worse. And you can start to see that happening with her. Yeah, and you start to spiral hard. And props to Fluttershy, because out of sheer anger, which is an actual legitimate good tool for some people to get over some PTSD issues, just with raw anger, she actually managed to push through that and then really push herself and fly through and push themselves the extra 3 flight power in order to get the thing necessary to succeed. And of course, horn goes off, everyone distributes. And Fluttershy's still going, which is also very logical, because remember, she is pushing herself. She is blocking out the world and pushing herself as hard as she can. So of course she didn't notice the horn, and of course she didn't notice the hurricane stopping. Why would she? Astonishingly intelligent and well presented. This whole episode is very well written. Huge props. And yeah, Rainbow Dash gives her full credit, because of course she does. The grain mattered. Who knew? Damn. And what I really like too, just to add one last thing, is this episode ends like on a really nice note. Obviously, Fluttershy can really fly. Kind of inverting insults is actually something that is a very long-standing tradition. I'll give you probably, I think, what is probably the most typical example I've heard of. You're weird. Then taking weird and owning it as a source of pride, right? The way that they deliberately invert that, the way that they cheer her on, that was good. That was good, and I liked that. And I like how the episode ends on such a positive note, without needing any kind of wah-wah, tonally or in terms of actual musical cues. Hello, Colgrim. I can already see people in chat doing exactly what I just mentioned. Because let's be honest, when someone calls you weird, they mean it as an insult. But scrum. Am I right? This is a really good episode. This might actually be my favorite episode to date, especially on analysis. This is an excellent episode. I'm actually going to add a little thing here at the top. So, I like to keep track of my opinions after analysis mode. I do that with every show I've done. I did it with Voyager, TNG, DS9, Babylon 5. I am going to... normal is what everyone else is and what you are not. I am going to jot this down as a new favorite for the future, for future notes. I'll get to that in a minute. Okay. So, that's actually all I got. Excellent episode. Next week, we'll be covering Ponyville Confidential, which I'm really looking forward to, and The Mystery of the Friendship Express, which I'm also really looking forward to. By memory, that's a good Pinky episode, and a good Everyone episode, also rarity. So, but for now, I am going to chop off local recording. Whoops, I'm going to hit that button first. Then I'm going to chop off the local recording.